Right, recordings on the go, everybody. Understanding well-being, the effective response of writing retreats. One of my favourite activities, writing retreats. There's nothing like it. Getting away with people. Right, over to you guys.
Thank you. You've set exactly the right tone there. I no longer can see the slides, but I'm presuming Gillian.
2 seconds, because they seem to have just come off my screen as well. Hold that thought.
I think they've just operated the screen sharing software bit, so it'll come back now.
Oh, okay.
There you go. Super. Thank you.
How's that? Okay.
Perfect. I can see that. Thank you. Can everybody else see it? Yeah, I hope. Nodding and smiling. Excellent. Thank you. Yes, I mean, you've set exactly the right tone as our chair, that the writing retreats are very productive and people feel very good about them. And what we decided to do was to drill down on that a little bit and look at, we've established quite a lot of evidence of the benefits of writing retreats over the years. This team, Morag Thau, who's here sitting on a lower seat today, and Gillian McClellan and Michelle Smith. So we've established quite a several data sets of the benefits of writing retreats, but in order for them to be sustainable, we need to look at the affective domain, which, drawing on the expertise of Michelle and Gillian, we've been able to do quite carefully in the study we're telling you about today. Let's look at the next slide, please, Gillian. So when I'm saying writing retreats, just to be clear, if you've obviously our chair has experience of these, but maybe not everybody has. So just quick definition here. By writing retreats now, I'm meaning this on the left, the image on the left here, the what I call the typing pool model. We're all in the one room and we're all writing, and a kind of collective concentration occurs, a sense of community, and all sorts of other benefits that we've written about before. In addition, on the right-hand side, I've started opening that up to people participating online. So for people who, for various reasons, cannot attend the in-person retreats, they can attend online. And there are benefits there as well that we've been able to track over the last year particularly. So it's a kind of hybrid thing now, and probably going forward, that's how it will continue. Next one, Gillian, please. By structured writing retreats, which is this model that I developed and I've written quite a lot about over the years, I mean a fixed program of writing slots, which to some people sounds a bit mechanistic or robotic, is a word that's been used as well, but it does seem to be part of how this works. So we have stuck with that rather, the fixed timings for writing, but with breaks for rest, for physical activity, not enforced, but allowing time for that, and allowing time and space for people to disengage from the writing, the intensity of that, and to talk about how the writing's going. So to talk about writing in progress, not just writing when it's done, you know, and it's published. And we have provided evidence of how this format can reduce writing-related anxiety and stress. It's developing also peer relations, not just peer conversations, traveling across disciplinary boundaries as well, this format of structured writing retreats, this program. Moving on to the last point in this slide is that they are now becoming, thank you, well established in institutions around the world, in online groups, but also in in-person formats. And I want to just, in the next slide, focus in on what I mean by that. This program that we're using, so it's 60-minute or 90-minute slots, residential and online, is 10.5 hours over 3 days. So it's not like 10-hour days, and it's hugely productive. And you can see the regular breaks and the 1.5 hours that we have at lunchtime, and people have their evenings free. So it's a model of writing that does not consume all of our time and energy at all, although it is quite intensive. And the next slide really shows how, in what ways, and these are just examples, but I think it's important to say, if I'm going to say it's an established higher education practice, what that means is, in undergraduate and postgraduate courses, it's now the writing retreat model in various forums is established in curricula in the UK and beyond. It's now an established part of early career research or training. I'm thinking particularly the NARTE, the Northern Advanced Training Research Initiative for the North of England universities. And the training for retreat facilitators, just in the last few years, even before the pandemic actually, there's growing demand for my course from universities wanting to send a cohort, maybe one person from every faculty. So there might be 6, 7 or 8 people attending from one university, or they might want a bespoke course just for their university. So that suggests the writing retreat model is embedded in higher education practice, is becoming embedded maybe. And on the right hand side of this slide, I wanted particularly to talk up the BF988, an accredited course at Strathclyde Business School on writing up research, writing up postgraduate research. So this is for PhD students at Strathclyde Business School, an accredited course, really trying to get them to develop the toolkit of writing at that level. And it's not just support for students who have problems with writing, whatever that might mean, and it could mean many things. It is actually saying we're going to raise the level, raise the game, using different tools, of which writing retreat is one tool, so to speak. Emma Davenport, similarly at London Met University, has developed a writing social. I've talked about social writing, and she uses the terms the writing social for undergraduate students in art, architecture and design, for whom writing is a particular challenge. And I know this from my own work with Glasgow School of Art, but it's not just a challenge for people in those disciplines. And Emma has developed a way of working with students, then student-led groups, then working with the tutors. So that's also getting embedded in that institution in that way. And finally, this new thing that we're starting up next year, we're launching the Writing for Research and Academic Practice, a European network, to pull together people who are working, using writing retreats and researching writing retreats across Europe. So that'll be a new launch next spring. But it's further demonstrating how writing retreat is becoming an academic, established in higher education practice. So I'm going to hand over to Michelle now, who's going to talk about the specific nature of our study in that context. Michelle.
Thank you, Rowena. I think you have done a fantastic job in sort of outlining just how helpful writing retreats are. So that takes us nicely on to our aim, was to sort of build on what we know at the moment. And so we wanted to try and capture the effective emotional changes that are experienced during the writing retreat. And because we know that that is so important for sustaining positive impact. And so in relation to the effective response or change that we were interested in, so what does that mean? So essentially, we were interested in understanding people's or writing retreaters' emotions and how that might have changed during and after the writing retreat experience. And so we really wanted to sort of start to understand that and understand that more in terms of, how effective the writing retreat is. And so we had sort of 3 main objectives within that. So we wanted to understand the impact of well-being, writing retreats on well-being. So we wanted to know, writing retreats are good for all the things that Rowena has just spoken to you about, but we don't actually know much about that impact on the participants' well-being. So how do they feel perhaps coming into the retreat, during the retreat and after the retreat? So that was something that we were really interested in understanding and exploring a little bit more. And the second objective for us was actually to really understand the differences as well in terms of impact between the residential retreats that Rowena currently offers and her online retreats. And I think that became much more sort of prominent in terms of how the world has changed, in terms of how we now operate. Everything is very digital. And post-COVID, we haven't gone back to the way we were. So we have to understand those working environments. And of course, some of us are back in the office and some of us are at home and some of us are hybrids. And so it's important to understand how helpful the retreat can be in both of those platforms. And I guess one of the important questions for us as a research team was to understand the difference in the residential and online retreat, because Rowena is physically present residentially, and speaking from experience, she can come and prompt you to move away from your desk when the 90-minute writing session is over. And although she can say that online, does it have the same impact? Because again, speaking from experience, sometimes I did actually need the tap on my shoulder to get up and move away. And so we want to understand, what are the differences in those two environments, and in linking that to well-being, does it have the same impact as well? And that takes me on to the third objective, which I'm going to pass over to Gillian to talk you through.
Thanks, Michelle. So the final aim of the study was to compare physical activity engagement between residential and online retreat participants, with consideration to access to green and blue space. So essentially what we mean by this is that residential participants engage in the writing retreat in Aberfoyle. They're surrounded by green and blue nature. And during residential retreats, breaks are factored in. So Rowena's explained that there's breaks within this programme, and they're encouraged to step away from their writing to engage in a form of physical activity. This can be in different forms. That could be going for a walk. There might be time for somebody to maybe put in a run. There's also been swims organised within the nearby lochs. So within that, and in contrast, online participants might not have the same physical activity experience, and the presence of being with other people physically encourages them to participate in physical activity from a residential experience. So the expectations of daily life can invade time for online retreaters. So there's the daily cleaning, there's the daily washing, and though some could argue that the household chores can be a form of physical activity dependent on the chore, evidence does suggest that accessing green and blue natural spaces improves mood, productivity, and overall health and well-being. So online participants may not live in natural spaces, and they may be surrounded by cities and kind of urban experiences with little access to green and blue space. So online participants can follow the structure of writing retreats, but it might differ from a physical activity perspective, and we were interested in this. So in an attempt to answer our questions, I'm going to discuss the methods and ongoing analysis. So we adopted a mixed methods approach, and I'll discuss the quantitative questionnaire that was implemented. So participant information was disseminated via the Writing Retreat Facebook group page, and this was how we recruited our participants. So for this, we had 26 participants who expressed interest, and the questionnaire was put into Qualtrics to create an online version of the disseminated questionnaire, and this was disseminated via an anonymous link through email. So participants clicked on the link, completed consent, and then completed the questionnaire. The questionnaire was adapted specifically for our study from the validated positive and negative affect scale developed by Watson-Clark and Tellegen. So it consisted of 21 questions related to the specific emotions, and we were interested in changing these emotions from baseline and follow-up responses, hence why participants were encouraged to complete the pre and post questionnaire. So from here, I'll pass you over to Michelle, and Michelle will discuss the qualitative section of our methodology.
Thank you. So because we wanted to explore and understand the experience, we thought it was really important to build on the questionnaire. So we invited all participants to engage in an optional semi-structured interview. And so I guess the thought around that was, in terms of making it optional, was to lessen the burden on participants. We understand the pressures and time pressures in academia and research, and this obviously adds to that. But we were keen to understand and explore their experience a little bit more. And so by inviting them to the semi-structured interview, we wanted to sort of unpack some of the questions from the questionnaire, and also, I guess, start to explore the results a little bit more. So at the moment, we've had 9 participants agree to take part in the interview, and we're hoping to build on that as we move into the new year with some future writing retreats. The semi-structured interviews were individual and conducted on Microsoft Teams at a time convenient to the participant. They were recorded with permission and have been transcribed verbatim. And we're using in vivo software to organise and analyse that data. And we're using Braun and Clark's reflexive thematic analysis to develop our themes, which we'll talk to you about in just a moment. But I think it's just important to say at this point, just before I pass back over to Gillian to talk you through some of the statistical analysis, is that, you know, we really wanted to, I guess, just understand a little bit more. So like, as an example, one of the questions on the questionnaire was, you know, how motivated are you to continue with your writing projects, and how distressed do you feel about writing? And so we wanted to just understand that change, if there was a change being reported. We just wanted to understand that a little bit more. So we used those questions to form, I guess, our approach in that interview. So we explored, you know, what was good for you, what changed, and in terms of your motivation, you know, what was impacting that. And so just to give you a bit of a flavour in terms of, you know, where those questions came from, that was sort of built from the questionnaire and the early analysis that we've completed. I'll pass you back over to Gillian.
Thank you, Michelle. So conscious of time, I'm going to fire through some of the analysis and preliminary findings. I'm going to emphasise that these are merely preliminary findings, and we intend on continuing the analysis to identify any significant findings. So within this, as mentioned, we had 26 participants, of which we had, some of it's not always moving each time I'm talking, so I'll just keep talking you through, and hopefully the actual presentation will catch up. We had 23 females and 3 males, and within this, though the aims would have been to have a closer split between gender, ultimately within the literature it does support an uneven gender participation within, and that's been highlighted that men are less likely to engage in writing support. So there'll be another graph that will come up eventually, hopefully, if I just keep pressing the arrow, and that graph will hopefully show the different formats from a residential and an online perspective. So there were 9 participants from online and 17 participants that were residential. And from there, we would like to look and explore more into those findings to see those differences. Again, hopefully these graphs will come up in due time. And then lastly, and the most important part would be the final graph, which I'll eagerly await to catch up as I keep pressing the arrow, will be out of the 21 questions that we have within the questionnaire, we showed changes from a positive change, a negative change, and no change at all. So we had one question that had a negative change, and what we mean by that is it wasn't quite what we anticipated from baseline to post questionnaire. And then we had 6 questions that showed no change from pre and post. And then we had 14 questions that showed a positive change and effective response. And what we want to try and do from there is to identify whether or not there are any significant differences within these changes. So that was a very quick analysis, and I appreciate that the slides still haven't changed, so we might just need to continue on as it catches up, but I'll pass you over to Michelle for that.
Thank you, Gillian. If you could try and move us on to the next slide, if that works for you. There we go. We've got some movement.
There we go.
Apologies about this technology at its finest. Okay, there we go. So again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because conscious of time, but I just wanted to pull out some of the themes and just give you a bit of an insight into what we're seeing in the data. So one of the themes that seems to be developing is around people. So people are really important in terms of nurturing sort of psychological needs in participants. And you can see from the quote, someone is saying, you know, they thoroughly enjoy just being around people and being able to meet other people. And some of the discussion around that is being able to discuss their ideas and progress and borrow techniques from each other, which is you know, something that seems to be quite important to these participants. They also spoke about confidence and sort of going into the retreat environment feeling quite underconfident in terms of their writing projects, and being able to really progress that and work on it during the retreat experience. And what we've seen in the data from both the questionnaire and the interviews is that there is a move along that continuum of self-confidence and self-belief in terms of the writing retreat is doing something to nurture that confidence in people. And we can sort of link that back to the idea of having people around you and having Rowena as the facilitator. And we link that back to our previous research from Hardy et al., where we looked at sort of nurturing those psychological needs. We also have a theme developing around well-being, which is good because that's what we're interested in. But lots of our participants talked about how helpful it was to move into a different environment, whether that's online or residential, but to be able to sort of switch off from the pressures of life and find a space to work on something that was important to them. And they talked and linked that to their well-being. Sorry, I think our presentation is playing around a little bit, so I do apologise for that. But I will move on to our final theme, which is productivity. And this is probably one of my favourite quotes so far in the data analysis. So this was a participant that talked about comparing their previous Saturday to the Saturday on a writing retreat. And they talked about how much more productive they were and actually how much more engaged they felt in the writing process. So they felt from a well-being perspective that they were happier, they were less tired, and felt like they could give more, which was a really nice finding for us because we want to think about productivity, but also being able to sustain that. And Rowena will talk about that to you in the next slide.
Thank you. Just to be very quick here then, there are a number of potential implications of this study. It's important for staff and students to have a sense of well-being, feeling well-being in relation to their writing. And clearly that is not entirely available in campus environments routinely. But the writing retreat, I think we've provided evidence in this study that the writing retreats that we've been running in person and online are providing these benefits. And the well-being, which I think is kind of a hot topic in UK higher education at the minute, staff well-being, hopefully student well-being as well. This is one way to deliver that. So I guess this poses the question of whether writing retreats, structured writing retreats, should be embedded in academic work and study. And I think the slide I showed you earlier on is evidencing that they somewhat already are becoming embedded in higher education practice. And we've provided extra evidence in this study as to why that should be developed further. The next slide is our reading list, but I wanted to end with the more coming soon. We will be doing more research on this. And we wanted just to end with the reading list is next, but then an acknowledgement to thank the participants who took part in our study and hopefully will take part in the next stage of our studies going forward next year. Thank you very much for listening. We're happy to have questions.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Rowena, Gillian, Michelle. That's great. I have to say everything you say chimes with my experience of writing retreats, running them, taking part in them. It's nice to have the evidence to support it because we used to just go and do them without actually having the benefit of the evidence. So I'm looking at a large group of people for questions. We've got a really nice group of people online here. If you've got a question, would you like to just turn your screen on and wave at me and I'll try and spot you. I've got a couple of pages worth of people here. As everybody's gone very quiet. I mean, one thing I'm interested in is the experience of running this with undergraduates, because while I thought about it, the concept of doing this with 200 or 400 undergraduates was enough to kind of phase me away from not doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Emma Davenport has done this work at London Met, so she would be the first person to talk to, I guess. In terms of my own experience, which is more with postgraduate students, yeah, the first time I was asked to do a writing retreat with a group of postgraduate students, they were like, what are we supposed to do? Just sit and write? So I've developed this 1+1 model where there's a bit of writing workshop. This is how you're going to do writing, get some outlining done, you know, and the toolkit effectively. So that's the first part. And then maybe a one-day writing retreat, either online or in person. So it's the 1+1, it's a combination rather than just saying, here's your writing retreat, off you go. And in the BF 988 course at Strathclyde Business School, they're getting seminars from me explaining all of that, the free writing, generative writing, the outlining, like, and all that stuff. And then they have designated times as part of the course to do retreats, to do groups, if to organise their own groups. They use the writing meeting that we've written about as well. So I think it's a 1+1. Does that make sense, Pauline?
Yeah, it does. I mean, for me, I always remember setting up a 3-day session, and somebody who was very skeptical said, "Oh, this will never work. I'll come along for the first half hour." And he ended up coming back 4 days running. He came back even the day after we'd finished to use the space, because he'd suddenly discovered a space in the university where he could write without being interrupted. And it was quite extraordinary, really. Charlie's waving at me. Charlie Sutton, over to you.
Hiya. I just wanted to ask about, you mentioned about sort of having it off campus, but I wanted to understand, you know, what your view and your understanding is of trying to do it on campus, because I have been involved in a previous organisation I worked at. They used to do them on site regularly every month, and there was a sort of team of us, academics, postgraduate students, and it was also extended to undergraduates. Not everybody turned up, obviously, to because it would have been untenable. But I wanted to understand. Obviously, that was a specific context where it worked. I wanted your view on that, really.
Yeah, I mean, the first time when I started writing about the writing retreats that I was running, I used to say it's not possible to get the benefits that we get at off-campus retreats in on-campus retreats. And now I don't think that anymore. I think it is possible to get some of the benefits, for sure. And if you run it, it will work, kind of thing. I guess the only challenge, and you'll know this, is if people are on campus, they tend to run away and check other stuff, clearly. But I guess if as facilitators, it's, everybody says I can't possibly write in the department or in my office, because even if you close the door and you're not interrupted, you might be. Yeah. And it's interruptible space, interruptible time. You might never get interrupted, but it's interruptible time. And I think that has to be one of the key parameters. It might be the key parameter for writing on campus, is to get them away from the department and try and encourage them, maybe with food and coffee, not to go back to the department. And it might be as simple as that. And to try and make the space where they can have the conversations with each other, not just with us, the facilitators, but with each other, because that's where some of the magic happens as well. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. Have we got any other questions?
Please feel free to jump in, guys, if you've got answers as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, in that case, I'm going to thank you all very much, all the whole team, very much for your presentation, for kickstarting this session. Really good. And I'd absolutely encourage everybody to get involved with running these sorts of sessions. Oh, Richard, go on, Richard. I can see that you've just put your hand up. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, hang on. Sorry, I'll just turn my camera on. Actually, I thought I was just clapping, but I was going to say something anyway. If you've mistaken the clap icon for a hand raised, but anyway, Sorry. Here we go. Yeah, I'm a big fan of these. Rowena may remember I went to one of her first, probably quite an early facilitators event up in Gartmore in about 2015, I think it was. And I've been running them regularly, and we run them monthly now. I'm in an education school at UWE in Bristol. We have them monthly, and it's an open invitation to our PGR community and colleagues. And the numbers vary depending. I try and mix it up different days of the week. I try and go for, because a lot of our EdD students particularly are working during term time, so we have them during half terms and things like that. Yeah, and we have between half a dozen and up to about 25 people, I think, is the most we've had. And we try, sometimes we offer them free drinks, sometimes we offer them lunch as well. We always try and embed a well-being walk, as we call it. I remember the walk through the, what was it, we would or something, isn't it? I think. Yeah. So we do something similar. So it's great. No, so I'm really in favour. I gave a presentation early on that started today about a project I've been involved in with pulling together some work from PGR students, getting them to become early career researchers and giving them a scaffolded route into publication. And this has been central to it, so we're big fans of this at UWE. We encourage our EdD students to form their own ones as well, which they do, sometimes online, sometimes in person. You know, and the whole thing is, you know, I'm full of praise for it. So, you know, anyone who's not tried it, I'd encourage you to do so.
Great. Thanks ever so much, Richard.
Excellent. Yeah, applauding. There we go.
That's good. Right, well, bang on time. I'm going to turn now to our second team of speakers. And we've got Fabian Little, I think, opening for this team, and Urasha joining in at some point. So moving from writing retreats to learning in action, a student educator, collective writing on the unnoticed hidden in the business curriculum. Fabian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Pauline, and I'll let Urasha kick us off. Yeah, I'll only say that it was a great first presentation, and we're going to be building on what's been said. You know, it's going to be a bit of a twist on what's just been talked about. It's a very neat kind of follow-on, almost as if it was, you know, put together on purpose. So thank you, and Urasha, just over to you while I bring up the our slides.
Thank you so much. Can you all hear me okay? Great. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to be here. This is our first time at this particular conference, and we're really excited to be a part of this community. Today, we are really pleased to present the work that Fabian and I have co-produced with our co-authors, Michelle Edmondson and America Harris. And the title of our talk is Moving from Responsibility Learning in Action to Responsibility Learning in Action. And it's a student educator collective writing on the unnoticed in the hidden curriculum at business schools. So I am a senior lecturer at Birkbeck, University of London. And you will see that all my co-authors now have different affiliations, but we were all once connected through Birkbeck. Fabian, you can introduce yourself shortly, but we were all together and brought together by our time as educator and students at Birkbeck, doing a particular master's program, which is the Master's in Organizational Psychology. So thank you so much for changing the slide. So this is the four of us. So we have Michelle on the top left-hand side, and on the bottom left-hand side is America. And then you can see the Fabian and myself. We actually had the pleasure of doing a short workshop on live collective writing with people at Birkbeck as a way of building resilience through collective writing with staff and student. And it's a form of building relationality and solidarity. So this is what we're going to be talking about with you today. Fabian?
Very good. Thanks, Urasha. So just to introduce myself briefly, so I, as Urasha said, as part of this project, I was one of the students. So it was part of my time when I did an MSc in organizational psychology in Birkbeck. I am now a second-year PhD student with the University of Southampton, and what we're talking about today is very much part of what helped me kind of make that jump, because I've got 20 years of corporate experience in various HR roles in large organizations, so very much pivoting now into the world of academia, and this experience, as well as the reflection that it's enabled, and our collaboration and our discussions has played a huge part in kind of bringing out really what it is that what I wanted to do, and this desire to work more towards sharing this through research, through the work that we're doing in academia. So this is what we'll talk to you about today. So it's twofold, really. It's about the topic in itself, the substance. So where we'll be talking about the hidden curriculum in business schools, and how it can, it could enable or might also hamper responsibility learning, but also the how we did it, and this experience that the four of us went through, how that could help in terms of developing further methods of collaboration, of knowledge creation as well. So I'll hand over back to you, Urasha.
Thank you. This morning, we were really excited to hear the theme for the Society's conference for next year, which was about activism and resistance in higher education. And this paper speaks directly to that. We actually came together through the module that I was leading, and I'm still leading on this module at Birkbeck. called Selection and Assessment. And this is the Moodle shell. Some of you might be familiar with the Moodle interface. We came together because after being assigned to teach this module for 2 years, in 2020, you know, this was the time of the pandemic and lockdown. And of course, it was the time where Black Lives Matter reached global prominence as a movement. And in this particular module, there were material that I was asked to teach that I felt deeply uncomfortable teaching. And they included curriculum that supported white supremacist, scientific, racist forms of seeing the world and how that shapes selection and assessment in practice. And so as part of this experience, I wanted to do a project with my students that was outside of the formal curriculum, where this was a writing project, and we called it, would it be okay to move? Yeah, thank you so much. And we called it Writing as Resistance Project. And really, it was an opportunity for me to connect and build solidarity with my students as we take on this journey of undertaking this material in selection and assessment, and reflecting on how this has shaped us as educators, as learners, as students, as well as professionals, and all the other identities that we bring into the classroom. And we were inspired by the work of Gilmore et al. On writing differently in academia, especially in the business school context. And we were also inspired by the work of Da et al. On this piece called The Business School is Racist, Act Up. And this was an opportunity for us to come together. If I could move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. To come together, and we also saw this call for papers that was potentially a good home for the work that we were trying to do. Now, when we say writing differently, this was really an experiment to create knowledge in a less hierarchical way, and to try and move away from the idea of extracting knowledge from those with lived experience, and then eventually those who produce the knowledge end up getting the credit. So what we try to do very differently through our project is to write about ourselves. And so we wrote ourselves into our research, and we were very much inspired by autoethnographic writing. And we tried to do a collective autoethnographic piece through our collective writing sessions. And we reflected on this issue of responsibility learning in the business school. How do we learn about responsibility, and how can we unlearn irresponsible practices in the curriculum as well as in the business school? So if we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Over to you, Fabian.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Viracha. So this is the paper that came out of the work that that we did, you know, talking about responsibility learning in action. So what do we actually mean by that? So a big part of it is to put it in contrast with responsibility learning in action, one word, which is what we kind of saw and explored based on our personal positionalities and our personal kind of angles in terms of being, you know, to use the words of bell hooks, you know, in the margins, in different ways, in our own very different kind of individual ways. Things that were part of the hidden curriculum, that were not talked about, that were not taught, not included, that were hidden, either deliberately or because of, you know, the systemic ways in the way that things have developed in our teaching and our practices. So the inaction for us was how this remained unchallenged, and or kind of moving into action was as a group to share our own experiences of, how what we experienced through this education is shaping us, what we noticed that, didn't feel right. There's a lot of kind of individual feelings and emotions that are being involved in here, because a lot of it was really about how we as individual, felt about some of the aspect of, what you just talked about, for example, some papers which talk about, scientific racism in terms of, or make certain claims which really are, hurtful to some of us. So it was about surfacing all of this and see how we could, make sense of all of this as a group, and bring this, into action between the four of us. So I've just got an extract here of what we say. This paper is an exploration of the possibilities for responsibility learning when a collective of students and educator come together outside the formal classroom to commune through writing, reading, and listening to each other in the same virtual space and time. A collective writing experiment as a non-traditional writing form has empowered us to engage in reflexive dialogue as part of our responsibility learning process and practice. And this reflexive dialogue is inspired by a paper from Cunliffe from 2002, where we very much, and I'll move on to the kind of method, what we actually did in practice, but where we really had that opportunity to write, but also to reflect ourselves as individuals on our own thoughts about, certain topics, about the topic of, the curriculum and responsibility within the curriculum, but also to exchange between ourselves. And I think sharing our positionality, sharing our experiences really impacted, ourselves as well, and helped shape this thinking. So in terms of what we actually did, how we wrote collectively, so we started, so as Yurasha mentioned earlier, she started the project off with a call for students to, to express an interest for this writing as resistance project. And there was quite a significant number of people who came up to the initial session, etc. Now, this was all in addition to the study. It wasn't part of any assessment or anything in particular. It was really on a voluntary basis. And bearing in mind that this was part of a course which was also for most people, part-time in addition to, full-time or part-time work as well. So, there was a lot of interest to start with, but with the commitment that it required, it ended up being the four of us, so Yuracha as an educator and the three of us as students, taking it all the way to the end. And by that, I mean, over the course of 3 months, having weekly collective writing sessions, and then what followed as well in terms of building the paper that, that I showed a second ago. Now, what happened, in practice? So we met for about an hour and a half every week from kind of end of September to December 2021. We'd probably start off by a 10-15 minutes catch up on how we were individually, just really, informally, just seeing how, checking in on everyone. And to talk about what we wanted to write about during these sessions, just exchange initial ideas, and that kind of helped people get in the mood of, the wider topic we wanted to talk about. We had the call for paper, that topic of responsibility learning, in mind from the start, but really no particular angle. We were all free to just write about anything that came to mind that we felt was of interest, or that, we wanted to explore a little bit further. And we would then write for about 30 minutes, staying online on mute, still cameras on, still kind of together, but obviously all in our virtual spaces. This is where the magic happened as far as I was concerned. I was in my office here, and I know, Yuracha kind of enjoyed having her scented candles with her as well. So we all had, it was still towards the tail end of the COVID lockdowns, and it still felt important to have that kind of comfort at home and share that between ourselves as well, in the way that we were working together. So we would write, again, completely unrestricted on how and what about, and then we'd spend another 15-20 minutes, half an hour sometimes, to read between ourselves what we've produced and share some reactions as well, and how that made us feel, and then kind of discuss it a little bit. And that would kind of take us from one week to another in terms of our own thinking, in terms of kind of capturing what others were were writing about, and our topics were sometimes, quite different in terms of, again, where we came from and what we wanted to discuss. And then, eventually we would end up with a body of writing with those kind of 3 months worth of weekly sessions, which we looked to, which we put together, and then started doing a very high level kind of sort of coding to an extent, where we looked at the key themes that were coming across through it, which helped us then structure this writing into the paper and look at what actually is within the hidden curriculum, basically, that we were talking about, how we felt about it and what we could bring on the table, basically, about the pointing out, bringing to light the hidden, basically, and suggestions of how to move forward. Now, upon Juracha's suggestion, we added a few sessions of collective writing that were focusing on our positionalities. I think we felt it was important in the paper to explain, and we were very happy to be open and vulnerable. I mean, that was a characteristic throughout our time together, about ourselves, about our own history, about our own characteristics, etc., because it was so key and critical to our writing. And about our positioning, and also how it came, we came to be as a group to help the reader through the paper, kind of guide through this this full experience, and that helped us build, this paper, which eventually got published. So hopefully that gives you a good sense of the how, and I'll pass back on to Juracha now.
Thanks, Fabian. That's perfect. I'm just going to briefly explain the idea of being struck and how we employed that in our writing, and then Fabian and I will share small excerpts from our collective writing sessions before we conclude. So we, as Fabian mentioned, our work was strongly influenced by the work of Anne Cunliffe. And Anne Cunliffe talked about the concept of striking moments or being struck. And these are sites for reflexivity. And we mobilized that in every single session that we came together to write. Now, in the words of Anne Cunliffe, being struck involves our spontaneous response, emotional, physiological, cognitive, to events or relationships occurring around us. A feeling that there is something important we cannot quite grasp in the moment. And this was key because it allowed us to, through our writing and our discussion collectively and individually, to confront with unsettling material in the formal curriculum. And it enabled us to, again, in the words of Anne Cunliffe, understand something that is already in plain view, and the difference this new understanding may make to our lives. So let's move on and share some of our writing.
Okay, thanks, Juracha. So this is some of the writing that we produced during our session. So just to provide a bit of a very brief background on this, in the paper, there are a lot of passages in italic like this, which is what we called our raw writing. So those are unedited passages of what we wrote during those sessions, which we included in the paper. Obviously, there's bits of analysis, etc., which were, through the peer review process that, really were developed and changed. But it was really important for us that those pieces of writing that we produced as a collective on these, kind of sessions remained as it was. So I'll just read this one about my own experience. So as the SNA, that selection and assessment module, started, I was just in a process in my role at work of starting the implementation of a new large-scale selection and assessment process and reviewing supplier proposals. The stars had aligned for me to put my learning into use right as I was gaining it. And this is exactly what happened, however, not in the way that I had expected it, at least not entirely. The teaching on individual characteristics, cognitive and ability testing helped me to speak the same language as the providers I was working with. However, In parallel to this, reading through critical papers about the mainstream ways of assessing and selecting people rapidly triggered a range of feelings within me. Some disbelief to start with, as it had become so obvious to me through my career that cognitive and personality testing were the right way to go, that my head initially had to let myself consider that this could be fundamentally critiqued. Once I got in that space, the critical teaching and reading really began what ended up being a transformative experience. Critical reviews of cognitive testing, such as IQ, which were looking at the history of the tests and how they were perpetuating inequalities, started to appear very logical to me. And on the other end of the spectrum, claims that people from ethnic minorities perform more badly at these tests because of their inherent abilities left me absolutely appalled and enraged. I took away from the SNA module the need, which feels to me like an absolute mandate, to question our practices in a critical way. It has, for many of us, acted as a call to action to do what we could to make a positive difference and foster more genuinely fair and equal working environments based on empathy and compassion, resisting the weight of existing common practices. Yuracha, do you want to, shall we move on to your extract, perhaps?
Yes, thank you. Yes. Well, I'll just thank you, Pauline, for the notice. So I'll just share my one extra. We both chose 2 excerpts, but we're gonna stick with one. So this was some of the writing, the raw writing that made it into the paper. I have been a full-time academic for 14 years, 18 years if I was to include my 4 years as an academic in training as a PhD student. I didn't dare to question the orthodoxy of pedagogical practices that I observed and received as a student, which I then, to an extent, conscientiously reproduce as an early career academic. Educators educate learners. Students are learners. There is much lip service paid to the bidirectional relationship of this learning process, yet the power dynamics in this relationship is rarely acknowledged explicitly in the classroom. I started my academic career as a young woman in my late 20s, ready to prove to myself and those around me that I can be good at this chosen profession. I had a niggling feeling that my visible difference as an Asian woman might be something that I had to manage and navigate, but I wasn't going to let that get in the way. I experienced being treated differently in front of the classroom and in work meetings because of my gender and my age. I understood that the sexism that I experienced was also in part due to my ethnicity. How could these 3 identities not have shaped how colleagues and students interacted with me? As I entered my 30s and became a mother, the sexism changed in its format, but was very much still present in how I was perceived as an academic in my institution. I recognize that while I have lived experience of being marginalized in different spaces, I also have privilege. I've been able to occupy space in the center in my institution through assimilation. I assimilate less now, but a degree of it is still required by the institution in order for me to survive. Writing together with students on the selection and assessment module is my way of resisting so that I can be part of a collective that aims to subvert hierarchies and establish ways of learning. Thanks.
Thanks, Yuracha. And very quickly, I know we're out of time, but in terms of the implications and contribution, the paper serves as a call to embrace responsibility learning in action and actively notice that unnoticed in our education practices in business schools, but also to reconsider that student-educator relationship. I think this was really a refreshing and incredibly, uplifting experience to partner in the way that we did. And so, looking at how we consider co-authorship and position students in terms of knowledge production. And it is a model for writing differently through collective writing. And those discussions Yuracha mentioned, we've done it with as an online exercise with another group of individuals. We're thinking, I know Yuracha has done it as well with another project, and I'm looking to integrate it into my own research as well as part of one of the studies. So it is a different model for knowledge creation, basically, and discussions. And that's it. We'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's really, really very interesting. We've just got 5 minutes for questions. If people would like to wave at me. Jess Moody, are you clapping or have you got a question? You said, who have we got? Jess is clapping, I think. So although you talked about this as being an activity with business in the business school, it's pretty applicable to any group of students anywhere. It's not, this isn't a business school defined paper. I think it's much more valid in a much wider context than that. So you've actually ended up with this really interesting pieces of writing. I guess one of the interesting questions is how you take this out to a larger audience. Publishing it is one thing, but are you repeating this activity with the next generation of students? Are you carrying on the process?
That's a really good question, and thank you so much for that, Pauline. I think this is something that I reflect on quite often. As Fabian has mentioned, this model of co-creation and knowledge production fundamentally for me is about doing research differently with different, I don't like the word stakeholders very much, but that's what I'll use, with different stakeholders who are traditionally left out of knowledge production. And, you know, I mentioned the term extraction at the beginning, really trying to think about how do we not just take from people's experiences and then just put our name at the end, you know, publishing papers and just have our names on it, even though we have learned a lot through people's lived experience and their accounts. I have used this with bringing on together a group of professional service women in higher education institutions to write about a phenomenon called office housework. So that's an ongoing project that I am doing, and broadening out to, you know, it is a form of pedagogy as well as a form of research. So doing it in a very non-traditional way, but I do believe this is something that I feel would really work really well in terms of building the idea of inclusion and I don't know about cohesion, but at least to build a community where people can reflect on their identities freely and safely in higher education spaces and not restricting it to the business school.
Yes, there's good points. I mean, we have a lot of narrative in the last, I suppose, 10 years about co-creation, all the work about co-creation, and then all the work about students as researchers, because you're thinking about essentially these are students as acting as researchers and then co-creating with you in that sort of liminal space that's somewhere between the academic and the trained and the untrained, if you like, but somewhere in between. What's interesting then is perhaps to do this kind of work both with PhD students and with undergraduates, and look at the ways in which different forms of writing evolve and different sorts of creation evolve, and because different levels of support are going to be needed. But it's a really interesting space to work in, and you're working on a topic that chimes with next year's conference, which is just absolutely brilliant. So you know, we should expect to see at least 2 or 3 papers coming in from you for next year.
Well, thank you very much.
That's really good. So unless somebody else is waving at me to add something else to the comments here, I'm going to say thank you, and thank you very much to your entire team, both of you obviously, and everybody else who's sitting somewhere else. And we'll move on to Cambridge this time, to Donna. Donna, are you there? Can you get your oh yes, Donna's getting her slides. That's really good. So slight change of topic here, but nonetheless looking at a really important element, and something that probably comes through in some of the writing that you're actually is coming across if you think about it in a different way. So Donna's going to talk about mental health problems in first generation students at UK universities. Donna, over to you.
Okay, can you see the full slide on your screen?
I can, very well, thank you.
That's perfect, and you can hear me okay?
Super, yes.
Fantastic. Okay, well, hello everybody. I'm Donna Smith from the University of Cambridge Faculty of Education, and today I'm going to present some of my findings from my PhD project on mental health in first generation students at UK universities. So here's an overview of what I'm going to talk about after a brief introduction to first generation students and mental health. I'm going to move on to present the key findings from a scoping review that I carried out of the international literature on mental health problems in first generation students. Then I'm going to move on to talk about a recent online survey that I carried out and present the key findings on mental health problems in UK first generation students. And then finally, I'll finish up by talking about the implications of these findings and the next steps for research in this area. So first things first, who are we talking about when we use the term first generation student? Well, students whose parents did not achieve a university degree are first generation students, whilst those with at least one parent with a university degree are continuing generation students. So you often see first generation students referred to as first in family students. And first generation students, so those whose parents don't have a university degree, now constitute almost half of the UK university population. So we're not talking about a minority group here or a small group. First generation students are a significant proportion of the UK university population. So what do we know about mental health in first generation students? Well, firstly, we know that mental health is cause for concern in students generally, and that's in the UK and worldwide. So here there's a few studies there on the screen which demonstrate the extent of the problem. So the top one, in an international study, 1/3 of first year university students screened positive for a mental health disorder. And that was a World Health Organization study carried out in 8 countries. If we turn to the UK specifically, over 42% of university students have experienced psychological difficulties requiring professional help. And then finally, this is a very recent report, only published in September, the number of students who reported mental health difficulties had almost tripled from 6% in the academic year 2016 to 2017 to 16% in the academic year 2022 to 2023. So what do we know about first generation students' mental health specifically? Well, the UK University Mental Health Charter states that first generation students are likely to face additional challenges to their mental health. And in this document from the Office for Students in the UK, it advised that universities should look at the intersection between mental health problems and first generation status in their students so that they could improve their understanding and support. So I wanted to investigate further. So the first part of my PhD I spent doing a scoping review of the literature on mental health problems in first generation university students. So you can see here the objective of the review and then the box showing what I focused on. So I carried out bibliographic database searches for peer-reviewed published articles in English which contained empirical studies and focused on mental health problems in first generation students from any university worldwide. So on the right hand side there you can see the PRISMA diagram which demonstrates the process of screening through the results of those searches. And after screening you can see at the end there 40 articles were included in the scoping review. So the findings from those 40 articles were synthesised, and for our purposes today, I've just put the key findings there on the left-hand side. First and foremost, no UK research. So in fact, 35 of the 40 articles were from the US. And actually, as an aside, I haven't really come across much literature from the UK on first generation students anyway. It seems that the debate has been dominated by class. But anyway, the scoping review showed that there are none on mental health in first generation students in the UK. The scoping review also demonstrated that there is evidence that mental health problems are more prevalent in first generation students, but without going into too much detail here, it was very nuanced and complex. And The majority of the studies were quantitative, 33 out of the 40, and many investigated a narrow subset of mental health problems, usually stress, anxiety, depression. So, as I say, for our purposes today, the key takeaway from the scope and review is that we need much more research. If you'd like any more detail, that scope and review was published in October. You can see it on the screen there, and it's open access. So to sum up so far, we know that almost half of the UK university population are first generation students, but there's surprisingly little peer-reviewed published empirical research about UK first generation students, and none on mental health. However, the scope and review of the international literature seems to support what the UK Student Mental Health Charter is saying. First generation students are likely to face additional challenges to their mental health. So I devised an online survey that you can see there on the screen, the advert for participants. And this, the part that I'm talking about today, the aim of that bit was to see whether mental health problems are more prevalent in first generation students than continuing generation students at UK universities, and whether the types differ between the two groups. So you can see there, participants were students aged 18 and over. They could be from any UK university and any level of study, undergraduates, postgraduates. And I ended up with 247 participants who completed an online anonymous survey. Sorry. And as I say, for our purposes today, I'm just focusing on the section of the survey that contained the CAP 62. That's a scale from the Counselling Centre Assessment of Psychological Symptoms scale. And it has subscales, as you can see there, for depression, eating concerns, substance use, which is alcohol and drugs, generalised anxiety, frustration, anger, social anxiety, family distress and academic distress, and then a total distress index, which encompasses all of those. And this scale is non-diagnostic. It was developed and it's used all over the US when students present at counselling centres. And it's used to gauge the severity of the psychological symptoms that they're experiencing. It's been tested in non-clinical populations. And I use this in preference to scales that are often used in student mental health research because it's a non-diagnostic scale, but also, as you can see from the list I've just read out, it covers a wider range of mental health problems than previous studies, which usually focus on stress, anxiety, and depression. So if we move on here, here we've got a very condensed version of the descriptive statistics table, showing some of the characteristics of the sample that I ended up with, the 247 participants. So you can see there's a good spread across the demographics, what you would expect to see, undergraduates and postgraduates, a gender bias, age, young, what you would expect to see. And what I was particularly pleased about is that the proportion of first generation and continuing generation students almost exactly mirrors what you would find in the general university population. It's not on there, but I also collected data on what region of the UK the participants' university was situated in. That was really just a check so that I could confidently talk about the UK, not just England or Wales or, the constituent parts of the UK. So here are the descriptive statistics for the variables. You can see here that if we look at the mean column there, means were highest for social anxiety, generalised anxiety and academic distress, followed by depression and eating concerns. And the means were lowest for family distress, frustration and anger, and substance use. And you can see from the end column there, the Cronbach's alpha values show that there was very good reliability for the subscales and the total distress index. So here we have the results. The data were non-parametric, so Mann-Whitney U tests were carried out to compare first generation and continuing generation students on all of those subscales listed there and the overall distress index. And you can see from this table that the mean ranks for all of the variables and the total distress index were higher for first generation students. So more depression, more academic distress, more total distress, and so on, all were higher for first generation students. However, if we look at the end column, the significance, we can see that there were no statistically significant differences between first generation and continuing generation students. So, although mental health problems were indeed more prevalent in first generation than continuing generation students, the mean ranks were higher for every variable and the total distress. There were no statistically significant differences. And these results were unexpected, given the findings of the scoping review of the international literature on mental health problems in first generation students. As you may recall, lots of studies had found greater prevalence of mental health problems in first generation students. And they were also unexpected given the findings of the report I was talking about earlier, that the one that only came out in September. Because that report, you can see there on the screen, it analysed data from over 82,000 UK university students over 7 academic years. And they found that the percentage with a mental health difficulty was higher for those whose parents did not attend university than those whose parents did, which is what I would have expected to find too. So that the results of my online survey are surprising in terms of both the international and the UK findings. But I have a lot more quantitative data to analyse. As I said at the beginning, this is just one slice of the data. I collected data for other variables which may be associated with mental health problems. At the moment, I've been looking at how my data compare to the US data, because those counselling centres all across the US, in every university, they have a huge data set where they combine all that data. So it'd be interesting to see how the UK data compares to that. But I also collected qualitative data in the online survey from some open-ended text boxes. And that data looks absolutely fascinating. I can't wait to analyse it because it'll definitely add context and depth to the findings from the quantitative bit of the survey. But for now, I'd just like to share one response to the question: what do you think universities could do to improve mental health in students? And this participant said, realise that whilst we are there because we deserve to be, a lot of us don't feel that way, particularly as we might be first-gen university students who have the pressure of self-family expectations and then how this impacts us mentally. I sometimes feel I get left behind due to not knowing the lingo or not fitting in with the middle-class accents, hobbies, etc. And I feel like this really impacts my mental health and ability to feel accepted. So to finish off, if we consider for a moment why mental health in UK first-generation students matters and why we need more research, well, firstly, in terms of support and interventions, these may need to be adapted to first-generation students, or we may need to develop different kinds of support and interventions to ensure that our universities are places where first-generation students thrive emotionally. And secondly, we know from a huge Nuffield project, which is cited here, that UK first-generation students drop out more and achieve less. And as if this isn't worrying enough, it's all the more striking when you consider that these researchers controlled for a multitude of factors: socioeconomic status, class, free school meal status, prior attainment, ethnicity, and many, many others that might be associated with academic success. So, what is it about being first? And it seems to me that mental health may play a role here, which has obviously motivated my entire PhD. And hopefully future research will shed more light on this. But for now, I'd like to leave you with this final thought here. Can we really claim that widening participation aims are being achieved if first generation students arrive but don't thrive emotionally and academically in our universities? So they're the references to everything that I've cited in this talk. And I'd like to say a really big thank you. Thanks to the SRHE for having me here today to talk about my research. Thanks to all of you for coming to listen. And most of all, thank you to my participants whose generosity and vulnerability in their responses to my survey has absolutely blown me away. My details are there if you'd like to email me or connect on Twitter. And if you'd like a copy of the slides or the scope and review, as I said, the scope and review is open access and you can access it via my ORCID there if you'd like. And thanks again.
Well, that's brilliant. Thank you very much, Donna. And yes, thank you for coming and bringing this to us. I'm really hoping you're going to come back next year and the year after with the next stage of this research as you actually get further into this. It's great.
I would absolutely love to.
I'll keep putting the papers in then, because actually having the research with the data that is helping us understand and drill down into this area is really important. And so there's a couple of, I don't know if you saw a couple of people were just clapping online there.
Oh, thank you.
Which is great. So we have about 10 minutes for questions for Donna, or we can go back to our other previous presenters as well, but starting with Donna. People have questions about what you're doing. I mean, having looked at this data and realised your data and realising it doesn't seem to chime with some of the previous stuff, were you worrying about the quality of your data or their data or both?
The one thing that I'm looking at the moment is comparing with the US. What they have for the counselling centres is they have cut-off scores, which basically tells somebody in the counselling centre, is this person presenting? Are these levels concerning? Are they higher than average? Are they average? And from my data, mine seems to be very high. It reaches the average cut-off point for somebody who's seeking help in the US, and at the minimum, and some of them are higher. So it seems to me as though, you know, you could, I mean, there's various ways to interpret that, but maybe the people that answered my survey, there's like selection bias going on, you know, they are actually struggling and that's why they've filled this in. I mean, I can tell you from the qualitative bit, so many people put in the, have you got anything else you'd like to say, would say, thanks so much, thanks for giving me a voice, thanks for allowing me to reflect on these things, you know. So you really get a sense of a lot of people struggling, you know, like, and maybe that's why the average, the means seem to be higher. I don't know yet. I'll have to look into it a lot more, but yeah, I can't lie, I was a bit disappointed that it wasn't statistically significant, but it seems like every mean for every single one is higher, you know, so I don't know. I need to look into it a lot more. Watch this space.
Yeah, certainly the provision for looking after these students in this country is a very different pattern to the US pattern. And the amount of support that's available locally as well as nationally is done in a different, because it's done in a different way, it perhaps does lead to different numbers.
Yeah.
Okay, has anybody else got any comments that they'd like to make, any thoughts for Donna in terms of progressing her research? No. And does anybody want to make any comments back to Urasha or to Rowena, who are both here as well? Okay. Well, there are people obviously looking for their cup of tea at this point as we move up to 3 o'clock. It is a vastly interesting area, so I hope we'll see you either in person or online next year for an update, Donna, because I think
I would love to come back, and like I say, the qualitative data is really, really interesting, upsetting sometimes, but also really, really interesting. And I think that says so much more than a box on a screen with statistics in it. And that was the criticism in the scoping review, is that people had done quite a lot of quantitative work, but never actually asked the students themselves, like what's, about their own mental health. So hopefully that will provide further illumination, and I would love to come back. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just kind of looking at you, Rasha and Rowena. Do either of you want to add anything else at this point? Rowena?
Yeah, I just thank you for the opportunity to just chip in. I think it's really interesting and disturbing, obviously, as well. But it's good that somebody's actually looking at this problem as thoroughly as you are. I'm thinking also that at the writing retreats, a lot of this stuff is where that comes out for undergrads, postgrads, and staff as well, because these issues are quite acute. Mental health is quite an issue. There are a lot of toxic environments, not naming any specifically, but because I see people from across the UK and beyond at my writing retreats, it seems that the UK has some particularly toxic environments for staff, and their allocation of their workload time for PhD supervision, you probably know this, is not great and it's not sufficient. And when I was a vice dean research, I argued with the research committee about this and tried to get it, the number of hours per annum per student raised, and they said no. So I know, in spite of my best efforts and even trying to deploy my profile, it's very difficult to change that, and supervisors therefore are clearly overloaded. So yeah, I think there are environments where some of this stuff comes out maybe informally, but also maybe that's something to think about as well. Is, I don't know if we can have this conversation elsewhere about how some of these issues come out in conversations I have or hear at writing retreats.
Well, it's strange that I'm here today, because it might look from the programme that there's no link between our presentations, but actually the next part of my PhD after this is a digital writing project where first generation students are going to come along and write anonymously or not, it's up to them, and I'm going to actually publish all the writing on a blog. So although it appears that we're not connected, we are really. So yeah, I'm really hoping that that's gonna bring out more stuff, but also be really helpful, because if people see that there are other people like them struggling, like, it can be helpful, can't it? Solidarity, basically. So I think there's solidarity, but there's specific mechanisms going on there. And I think the previous paper, which I just downloaded and have kind of quickly looked at from the previous session, I think it'd be good if the three of our projects could talk sometime between now and next summer, when I guess we'll be putting together things for SRHE 2024. So if there's a way in which we can do that, I mean, I've said thank you to the previous person, I'm just about to say thank you to. I'll find you, Donna, and maybe we can connect and have a chat. Definitely.
Yeah, just
how wonderful that would be.
Let's do it. Right.
Good. Well, that's the point of conferences, to get people together to make those connections with people that you just wouldn't fall over in the course of.
Absolutely, yeah.
You find other people so that you can get on and do other things. And if there are other people who feel their work chimes in with this theme and what's going on, then do get in touch with our speakers. It's all about making those connections and moving on to the next stage. Okay, anybody else? Do you want to have a last word?
Well, I think I might invite Fabian in. He's also always very, very good at summarizing and also picking up on insights that I often miss. So, Fabian wears multiple hats in this space. So I know Fabian has mentioned he is considering using the collective writing as one of the data collection methods for his PhD. So yeah, Fabian, would you like to say anything?
No, just again, well, as I think Donna, you mentioned the connections between the three presentations. Actually, has been quite brilliant to see, and the mental health and well-being thread as well. I mean, we probably haven't we talked a lot about perspectives of minorities and things like this, but actually challenges of mental health when it comes to questions of responsibility learning as well, and of acknowledgement in the process of education is something that that kind of comes through quite substantially as well. So I think, yeah, it was brilliant to kind of get all of those views, and I think there's many parallels and connections to be drawn, be it from a methodology perspective or actually just the substance, what we're all learning through those kind of study and experiences.
Excellent. Good. Thank you all very much. So with that, I'm going to bring this session to a close. We've got a 15-minute break now until parallel sessions 4, and I shall remember to thank Rhianna and Mariam for managing to get you through all together in the same session. There is some magic that happens in the office that's just try to pull sessions that work together, and it seems to have worked really well this time. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a nice cup of tea, and we'll see you again at 4:15.
Thank you for doing a lovely job of chairing us all as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Pauline. Take care. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, thanks, Mariam.